Chapter 32. An Unusual Boat. Romans 12, verse 11. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. A large, unique sailing freighter showed up at Ibo one day. Their boat was 100 feet long with large freight holds. They had stopped in Fort Pierce briefly before departing Florida, and Common Ground Church had loaded 2 pallets of food into their holds to bring to us in Haiti, which was a welcome surprise. This was the boat that was with us that stormy night in La Cool that dragged into the mangroves. They traveled with us and worked with us doing crusades and other activities. With a family of that size, it was challenging for them in Haiti, and after several months, they had to head back to Florida. It was a great time for our kids, as they had rarely had other kids from their culture to hang with. For me, having Peter, the father, to work with made my life easier and more enjoyable. Many of the people that spent time with us expressed the desire to do something long-term. My response to them was generally the same. The life was very rewarding, but it came with many challenges and risks. It also took a tremendous level of organization to keep everything going and financed. There were times you wondered how and why you got into this work, and if you could get out of it in one piece or even alive. If the answer to the how and why question was not because you knew beyond any doubt that God had called you, then you probably shouldn't be there. The bottom line was you needed to know that you knew that you were called to do this work. That it just seemed like a good or fun idea was not enough, because to survive long term, it had to be God's plan. Chapter 33. Movie Night in Haiti. Mark 16, verse 15. He said to them, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation." We were the only long-term steady mission boat in Haiti. Others came and went over time. The McFarlanes came and went on various occasions. They were the ones that arrived at Ibo a few weeks after us. They were active there for a year or two and then came back again later. When they returned, it was with a full movie projection and screen setup with them on the boat. There is a movie that was made to be used as an evangelical tool worldwide. It was simply called The Jesus Movie. This full-length movie used the Gospels in the Bible for a script. It had been dubbed in many languages, including Haitian Creole. The McFarlanes had a Creole version on board. They joined us for a while, following us to the areas where we worked. With their movie setup and sound system, we put on movie night in Haiti in numerous locations. We did one by the church we built in Tigini. Huge crowds came out. There were so many people there that they flowed down the road in both directions. We repeated this in all local areas. The most interesting of the showings was in the backwoods by Joyous Jean's place. This was after Joyous had come to Christ, but before the rest of the area followed suit. When Joyous saw the story in living color, he got the whole picture. When the crucifixion part of the movie came, he was up on his feet shouting on Christ's behalf. The reality of what Christ went through was now clear. Chapter 34, Fishing. Mark 1, verse 17. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. People often asked us if we did a lot of fishing on the boat. On the first leg, traveling down the west coast of the U.S., we were pretty consumed with the steep learning curve, training crew, and settling in. To fish in Mexican waters, a license was required for all on board, and these were prohibitively expensive. Mexican regulations also made it very clear the presence of fishing gear on board would be sufficient to prove that people on board the boat were fishing. So all fishing gear on board was completely dismantled and stored deep in the engine room. We did begin to fish at sea, but not as a sport fisherman would. We fished for food, not for the fun of fighting a game fish at sea. We did not use traditional fishing gear. On the rear deck, a post helped support the aft top deck. We attached a 1,200-pound cable winch to the post. But instead of cable, the winch held 750 feet of woven 800-pound test tuna line. On the end of this line was 6 feet of heavy copper lead wire that connected to the lure to keep sharp teeth from cutting the line. The lures were brightly colored 12-inch rubber squids. With the boat traveling at 9 knots, which was our regular cruising speed, we trailed this squid 400 feet behind us. It ran on the surface well behind, bouncing in and out of the waves. This technique was aimed at catching predator game fish such as mahi-mahi. A bungee cord system was rigged by the winch to absorb the shock of a large fish hitting the boat. When a fish took the hook, we would slow the boat down to a crawl while the fish was winched in. We caught fish, but we began to lose gear as we got further south. For the 800-pound test line to snap, either very big fish were hitting the bait or large sharks were hitting it. My guess was mako sharks. When we were in Haiti, one of our guests who had been on board before brought 2 deep-sea fishing rods and reels to the boat and left them for Jordan to fish with, which he did regularly. But game fish in Haiti are hard to find. When I think of a commercial fishing industry in a country, what comes to mind is commercial fishing boats that work on the coastline and offshore, bringing in large and numerous fish. In Haiti, that's not the reality. Haiti has been overfished, and the average size of fish taken today is 6 to 8 inches or less. When scuba diving in the Bahamas and elsewhere, you would see the occasional shark. The sharks were there because food was there. My dive time in Haiti totaled hundreds upon hundreds of hours. Yet during all those dives, I did not see even one shark while diving. The sharks were not there because there was no food for them to eat. While we were in Haiti, the Cuban and Haitian government seemed to have some sort of deal. Cuba sent doctors to work in Haiti, and Haiti allowed Cuba to send commercial fishing boats to fish in Haiti. This made no sense, and the Cuban boats were to discover this quite quickly and simply park their boats near Ibo. In Haiti, there are 2 kinds of fishermen, the poor and the really poor. The really poor fish from their dugouts. They had little floats and hooks with fish line and paddled about, putting all these little long lines in the water to catch something. These fishermen liked fishing around the boat at night when the generator and lights were on. The lights attracted fish, so they had a better chance of catching something. The fishermen, who were not in as desperate a position as the line fishermen, had nets that were handmade. These guys fished in teams. A group of men would stand on the shoreline, hanging on their rope, while the boat with the net rowed out into the bay, feeding out rope and net as they went. They would make a big circle and then return to the shoreline with the nets out around the bay. The teams would now have both ends of the rope and begin pulling in the nets. The size of the nets used depended on the resources of the fishermen. All of the nets were handmade. You could watch the fishermen on the beach in the afternoon working on their nets, repairing holes and trying to make the nets bigger so they could catch more fish. The fish caught in the nets were very small. They pulled the nets in the same places day after day and week after week. This process would take about an hour to do, and they may end up with perhaps a dozen fish, all under 8 inches long. These fish were either eaten fresh or hung in the sun to dry for market. In the fishing areas like Apur, the smell could be quite strong. In Apur, many of the fishermen used large S-type fish traps out in deeper water near the reefs. These reefs were woven from palm fronds, weighted with rocks, and baited. Fish could swim in, but could not get back out. The fishermen with traps would tend to them daily in their dugouts. They would empty any fish, rebait the trap, and put it back down on the bottom. They rarely took the traps back to shore. One can wonder why they don't give the ocean a break to let the fish population come back up. But the reality is that they are trying to survive today. Chapter 35. Groups. Luke 10, verse 2. He told them, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send workers into the harvest field." During our time in Haiti, groups and guests came to us from many different areas, sources, and backgrounds, and with many different talents and desires. They also came to us for different reasons. Many came back for more than one visit. Our first groups were locals from our home area when the Tickerner was based in Point Roberts Marina near Vancouver. We did weekend youth trips into the San Juan and Gulf Islands. Individuals from these groups often expressed an interest in joining us later. That is how much of our crew came to us for the voyage down to Haiti. We had young people from their late teens through early 20s come as both individuals and groups. Some groups came as entire families, some for a straight mission experience, some for a combination of mission and adventure. Some had skills they wanted to use, like building roof trusses and putting on a church roof. There were doctors and nurses who came and worked with the sick and helped train me. Some groups came from free ed. They were usually just for a few days as part of what Ed was doing. Many of our groups were aboard for a week or two, but some individuals came for a month at a time. I remember one youth group from a Florida church. Whenever the group checked in with the church on our sat phone, they always had the same question: how many people came to Christ today? That church and I clearly had a very different views on both missionary evangelism and the main purpose of having groups on our boat. Our evangelism work took a long-term view: build relationships and teach the whole Bible to build followers of Christ, not to get people to pray a prayer short-term with no foundation. Yes, our goal was to spread the gospel, But that was not the goal I had for groups and individuals that came. It was something that happened, but was not my group goal. My goal for guests was not for them to change the Haitians they met, but rather for the Haitians they met to change them. The worldview of most North Americans does not line up with the realities faced by most of the people of this world. I wanted our guests to experience the realities faced by some in this world and to gain an understanding of the task faced by missionaries all over the world. If I could send these people home with a worldview that had been altered, if I could break or soften their hearts through what they saw and experienced and change them into worldview Christians, then I felt I had done my job. We had goals for every group that came. Some were to complete certain tasks as part of our projects, others for special things that they were trained for, but my goal of opening their eyes and hearts to understanding the challenges of people and missions in the third world was always present. When some of our guests went on to work in the third world missions, it was all worth it. As I have said, some people came to stay and work with us more than once, and some of our visitors became long-term friends. While at the dock in Florida one day, a mother and her 2 young daughters came down to check us out. They knew us from Common Ground Church. Mary wanted to talk about coming down to Haiti for a few weeks and wanted to bring her 2 young daughters with her. Naomi was about the same age as our children, and Leah was a few years older. At first, I was a little hesitant over how they would cope there, but we set a date and down they came. This was one of those occasions that I completely misjudged how people staying on the boat with us would work out. My concerns vanished quickly upon their arrival, and they were a delight to have on board. The 2 girls did extremely well, and Mary became known as our singing visitor. She was a teacher and had a fun kids song for every occasion with the children on shore. After they had returned home, the people on shore kept asking if they would come back. This was always a great sign of how people did in Haiti. In fact, Mary and the girls came back a number of times, and they became great friends of ours. The girls both grew up, and I had the privilege of being at both of their weddings. You never knew what to expect with Mary. She was full of surprises. On one of their visits to Haiti, she arrived at the airport with a cooler in hand. Some Moose Tracks ice cream, my favorite, packed with dry ice to keep it frozen on the trip from Florida. There was a cold feast upon our return to the boat. Many knew that my 2 favorite forms of junk food were orange soda and Dorito chips. She also knew that Dorito chips were nearly impossible to find where we were in Haiti. I remember coming into the dock on one of our return trips to Florida and being met on the docks by a welcoming group of supporters. Mary was among them, and in her hands she had an orange soda and a large bag of Doritos as a welcome home gift. A small thing perhaps, but we knew we had good friends each time we returned to Florida. After we finished our time in Haiti, the girls continued to go down to Haiti and even lead groups down with free ed. In fact, Leah became a nurse and spent substantial time there serving and helping the sick and needy in Haiti. It was this type of response from groups that we were aiming for in Haiti. Chapter 36, Repairs and Maintenance. Genesis 3, verse 19. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return. Living on the boat, I came to recognize that God is into recycling. The first clue that this is true is the dust to dust verse. Yes, he is talking about us, that we came from the dust, and when we die, our bodies return to the ground. But this theory also applied to the Tinkerman. The Tinkerman was nearly 50 years old and was constantly trying to recycle its various parts, wood and metal and salt water. The wood wanted to rot, and the metal wanted to rust and corrode. To protect the metal parts from rust, we had some zincs wired into the boat. In electrolysis, the zinc would be eaten away first, protecting the steel. Salt water preserves wood, but fresh water, when soaked into wood, will cause rot to set in. To keep the Tinkerman from recycling itself required constant work, and as we repaired damaged areas, we tried to make things better through improvements. Some of this work was done by me on site in Haiti, and some in Florida by me, and some by volunteers in Florida. Sometimes when things broke, we had to deal with it right away, and sometimes we had to wait for parts. One year, we were loaded and on our way back to Haiti. After one day out, the main toilet decided to pack it in. We were in Abaco in the Bahamas and had to wait a day or two for a new, improved toilet to come in from Florida. Boats do not use regular toilets, so it had to be shipped in. Other things you could plan in advance. For example, we knew our 12-volt power system was struggling from wiring that was too old and thin, causing voltage drops and causing our battery banks to discharge faster. We had wires shipped to us, and for 3 days, I rewired the entire system. When the McFarlanes first came to us in Haiti, they had a crew member named Randy. He came to Haiti a number of times and was one of those guys that could fix anything. One day in Haiti, I had a problem with a coolant high-volume water pump. It would not seal around the shaft regardless of how many times I tried. Randy came over, took it apart, and reassembled it, and magically it was like new. One year I had replaced the railing system on the back of the boat. The next trip to Florida, I removed the forward railings and repaired the wood where the rail stanchions had been attached. Randy came and built new wooden railings to match the rear ones. In the process, we discovered some rot in the fairly massive bow structure that protected the foredeck in heavy weather. Randy showed his shipwright skills by doing an incredible job rebuilding it. I always think of him as Wandy versus Randy. The Haitians could not do ours. A permanent resident group of people lived aboard their boats at the Fort Pierce Marina. This marina always put us on the same dock each year, so we got to know those liveaboards quite well. Rudy and his wife lived on their own boat, which Rudy had built. The rear section of our pilot house that housed the main head, bathroom and shower, was showing signs of rot and needed some repair. Rudy helped me repair and enlarge the head. It sounds simple, but it was a huge job, and one that I did not have the skills to pull off. A constant line of repairs and improvements made the boat safer, more efficient, and simpler to maintain. The help from friends made this possible. These are only a few of the many projects that were done. In addition to repairs, we received help with a host of things. So many people just went beyond the call to help us and deserve my eternal thanks. Donnie Hilton was like a lifeline. He was the associate pastor at Common Ground Church, our go-to guy, and had a heart of gold. He made so much possible. Tony Harned came to Haiti regularly with Donnie and always was on the dock whenever he came and went. Tony just gave and gave without limit, both when we were in Haiti and later helping us settle in Florida when we finished. Tim, his wife Geneva, and his family's help to my family was beyond words. He also came to Haiti regularly with Donnie and Tony. Tim's contributions are not only acknowledged by us, but by the people of
Opak
and Laukul. In Laukul, one woman named her child T. Tim. I think they would have built a statue in his honor in
Opak
if they knew how. Instead, they brought him a stream of offerings. Tim was former U.S. Navy and worked in the engine rooms. We had one motor down, and the Haitians were worried that we would have to leave Haiti to get it fixed. Donnie, Tony, and Tim brought us a needed fuel injection pump and installed it and got the motor back online. The village decided that Tim was the one to thank, and so they did. Tim and his family treated us like family. If it ever felt like a vacation in Florida, it was because of this family. Tim took it upon himself to be the provider of family movies for the boat. Over the years, we got hundreds of movies through Tim. Each year, he would provide us with a new collection and even cataloged all the movies we had on board. He was also our tropical weatherman. He tracked all those nasty storms for us. I remember being in Laukul. Jordan had just picked me up off the beach with the skiff. By this time, Haiti had cell phones, and while riding to the boat in the skiff, my cell phone rang. It was Tim's wife, Geneva, with a very brief message from Tim. She was very brief and said, "Tim says to move to the hurricane hole now." She didn't know why, just that she had gotten an urgent message from Tim. That was good enough for me. We moved the boat into the hurricane hole. I trusted his judgment without question. Chapter 37. Rats, roaches, and little white worms. Exodus 8, verse 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the ground, and throughout the land of Egypt the dust will become gnats." The first time we brought the boat into Port-au-Prince, I was on the main wharf when 3 big rats came scurrying by, running right over my foot rather than going around it. I lived on a boat. I did not like rats. Before we talk about rats and boats, let me tell you about rats and a young Haitian boy. One day when I was walking through Laukul to Pastor Herod's house, I noticed a very small grass and mud hut a bit back in the bush across from the pastor's home, with a decrepit old lady sitting out front. The hut looked like it was about to fall down. I asked the pastor about her, and he shook his head sadly and walked over there with me. The woman looked like she was simply wasting away. which was sad enough. Inside the hut on the dirt floor, on some dirty clothes, was a young boy, maybe 2 or 3 years old, and starving to death. His toes and feet were a mess of bloody sores. I asked about the sores, and the lady simply said, "Rats." At night, the rats would chew on his feet. The boy was too weak and small to fight them off. Needless to say, we started giving the boy emergency nutrition and feeding the old lady as well. The child's mother had dropped the boy off at the grandmother's and abandoned them. The little guy survived, and with continued care, his sores healed. One night during high wind and heavy rain, their hut simply fell down, and they made a lean-to from the hut's remains. I talked with the pastor about it. I would pay for materials and for some of the work if the church would organize putting up a new hut for her. If I was seen as the one doing it, everyone would be asking me for a new house, and I did not want to go down that road. The new hut was built, and we continued to help the two with food. The young boy grew big enough and started going to our school. We always did everything we could to keep rats from getting on our boat. When one managed to get aboard, it might last a few hours, but we would hunt it down without mercy. When we were at anchor, rats had no way of getting to the boat. If we had to pull up to a dock in any questionable area, which we tried to avoid, it was always only for a brief time, and we kept a watch, both for people and rats, on deck. When we were tied up to the mangroves in the hurricane holes, the rats would try to run along our 1-inch mooring lines. To prevent this, we had big rat guards placed out on the lines that the rats could not get past. Previously, I talked about a rat that got on in Salina Cruz after the hurricane. We had rats get on board 2 more times over the years. Their time on the boat was equally brief and violent. We were from Canada. It gets cold there every winter, so we never had to deal with cockroaches in Canada. The whole trip down to Haiti, we were cockroach-free, and our first day in Haiti was as well. Then we went to Florida and restocked. We learned a lesson about warm climates. When you bring volumes of food aboard, get rid of all the cardboard boxes. Roaches lay their eggs in the cardboard. If you let the cardboard stay, you will eventually have unwelcome guests abroad. They become a real problem as the years went on. At night, we would sit on the bow and visit. Ingrid and I would then prepare for a sneak attack. We would go down into the forward cabin quietly. As the roaches scattered, we would kill as many as we could, usually 6 to 8 each night toward the end of the year. Our cabin was in the rear of the boat on the main deck. In the middle of the night, it was not uncommon for one of us to wake up, fly out of bed, and switch the light on, knowing that it was a roach crossing over our neck or face that woke us up. We would hunt down the roach and kill it. We did not enjoy this. I found some roach traps in a shop in
Pensionville
above Port-au-Prince. If you had any wealth in Haiti, you lived in Pensionville. They actually had a few regular stores up there. I took the baited traps back to the boat, but when I opened them, I discovered that they had expiration dates that had passed years ago. I put them out, and apparently the roaches just laughed at them. It wasn't until we stopped at Nassau in the Bahamas on the way back to Florida that I was able to buy some fresh traps. It was amazing. Once the traps were in place, The roaches were gone by the third day. We never let our stock of roach traps get low after that. Sadly, cockroaches were not the only bug problem that we had to deal with. Since we first left Canada, Ingrid baked all of our bread fresh on board. In the beginning, we used purchased flour and the dough was kneaded by hand. Later, a group that had been on board bought us a mixing and kneading appliance that made Ingrid's life much easier. We also switched from purchased flour to buckets of whole grain and had a small mill that made fresh milled flour every time Ingrid made bread. We did this because whether it was flour bought in Florida and stored on board or flour purchased fresh in Haiti, the flour would always start having tiny white worms throughout every bag. The flour bought in Haiti seemed to have the tiny critters from when they were first purchased, and Florida flour would take a few months for worms to hatch out. We never solved how this happened, it just did. They were not very noticeable unless you really examined the flour up close. Then you would see movement. I suppose if you never knew that they were there, you would never see or notice it in the bread. When it first started, we had no other option but to run all flour through a sieve to remove any worms before using it. Just one of the joys of living in the tropics. Chapter 38, Hurricane Holes and Mountains. Psalm 91, verse 2. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. If you're going to live on a boat in the Caribbean region, you need a plan for hurricanes, and you need to implement it in a timely manner. You are better to take action early rather than procrastinate and get caught. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how often. There was a hurricane hole by Ibo on a small island with a small lagoon. Our first serious threat in Haiti was Hurricane George in September 1998. George had the Dominican Republic and Haiti in its sights, and as it approached, it was blowing at a Cat 3. Cat 3 is bad. Cat 4 and 5 are catastrophic. We moved in early to be sure we were ready. To get into the lagoon, you had to come in over the reef at high tide. The idea was to get into the hole as far as possible, getting your bow right into the mangroves. Next, tie yourself into as many trees as possible and get all your anchors out behind you as far as you can with every piece of chain on board. Then pull everything high off the top of the boat and tie everything down on deck and wait. The waiting could often be the hardest part. Hurricane George came in strong, making landfall on the south coast by the Dominican-Haitian border. Fortunately for us, there were 6,000-foot mountains in that area. George passed over the mountains and was torn apart by them. It quickly rebuilt as it came back out over the water. But as it passed right over us, it was down to a maximum of 40 miles an hour. The storm carried on to Florida and came through the Keys as a Category 2 hurricane and then went ashore in New Orleans. We were spared the wind, but in 12 hours, 14 inches of rain came down on us. We hid in the hurricane hole a number of other times as hurricanes rolled by, but the mountains to the east always protected us. Our children loved the hurricane hole and exploring the little island. We would go into it sometime just to take a break for a day or two. What I found truly scary was having some place where there was no safe hurricane hole to hide in. Having been caught in one off the coast of Mexico, I would go to great lengths to avoid that happening again. We had several close calls in the Bahamas, and I would have to say that Georgetown was the only real option for cover. There were others around, but they were too small or too crowded. The main anchorage in Georgetown was not the place to be, but there was one hole I could get into. It was hard to get in as the channels were shallow. It did not have 360-degree protection, but it had low cliffs that I would get in close to that would break the wind from two directions, and the open directions were very shallow and would limit wave height. The bottom had superb holding and would easily hold up to Cat 3 winds. Anything above that was risky no matter where you tried to hide. For one storm, we moved into the hole, and I changed the bow directly into the cliff as that was going to most likely be the direction of the strongest winds. After all that work, the storm decided not to follow the forecast track and pass to the north of us. There were, however, some fantastic waves on the outer exposed beaches. The problem with trying to run from a hurricane is the level of error or inaccuracy of hurricane track forecasting. In trying to run away from a storm, one might actually run right into it as its track changes. I had this happen to me twice. The first one was a hurricane that we went right through in Mexico. We were trying to get away from it, but changed its track, and we went right through the worst of it. The second one we tried to run away from was Francis in Florida in 2004. We looked at the forecast and decided to run south from Fort Pierce. As we were running south, the Weather Service changed its forecast. The forecasted storm track moved south towards where we were running. We turned the boat around and headed back north in the intercoastal waterway until we had to stop for drawbridges that wouldn't open at night. The next morning, we were off at first light, and we ran north until our fuel was low, and it was time to stop and prepare to fight. While we ran north, so did the forecast. If we had kept running south, we would have avoided the storm for the most part. Francis was a large storm. The eye ended up coming in right over Fort Pierce. It stalled and sat on the top of the city for 24 hours. The marina there was completely destroyed. Every boat was sunk and the docks were gone. We were well to the north and still had wind gusting in the 80s for 12 hours. Over the 7 years we were there on the boat, we were threatened by hurricanes more times than I can remember. But the ones I have been through, I will never forget. Living a mile from the coast in Florida now, they still keep coming.